perfect timing because the buzzsaw going on right outside my window has been taken away. Hello!
Right.
Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil Mackenzie.
Hello.
Hello, mate. Good to... I don't know. I can't do
What's
that.
up, bro?
Okay, all right. We should do this from now on. Welcome to Heavy Hands. Smoothest intro yet. And how deserving. Because we have quite a big card to talk about. In fact, the first of what feel like several quite big cards. Suddenly, I almost feel like the UFC just got their ass spanked by a federal judge in the now over a decades old monopsony case. So that's going ahead, and it's looking pretty good for the fighters, who are a massive opt-out class that I think comprises every UFC competitor from, I want to say it was 2011 to 2017 or something like that. So the UFC business may be changing dramatically in the coming years. Who knows? Fingers crossed. And also the UFC matchmakers are out there online getting out ahead of the unfair criticism that all their cards suck. And probably I have to assume, based on what we see as podcasters and writers and et cetera, that though this matters less to them because they have so many guaranteed paydays in their various contracts, they are probably seeing a decline in viewership because of all the dog shit Apex cards, because people do not care about them. And so suddenly we have the next several months, it looks like we're getting almost entirely cards where they are going to some city and having to sell tickets and therefore having to book interesting, meaningful matchups. And I am very happy to see that. Whatever the cause is, this is the first of them, and Phil, I will take it.
I mean, some of them are perhaps not as interesting as you might want. Holloway versus the Korean Zombie is obviously a great fight, but if that one, for some reason, falls through, it's going to be Anthony Smith time again.
Yep. Although Smith's span will probably be funny.
Yeah. Smith span 2. That's
right.
Not forget.
And the first one was funny, so...
But yeah, it's nice to see them on the road, and if nothing else, it means that we'll get much sort of better atmosphere, and it'll be nice to see things like a Brazil card again.
Right. Yeah, we got. It's been a while. After that, we have a Paris card with Cyril Gane in the main event. That's cool. Mm-hmm. I don't know if have they ever had an event in Paris? Maybe once.
Yeah, I mean, MMA was only legalized there relatively recently.
Right. And I don't particularly care about Adesanya Strickland, but that's happening in Australia. We've got Tai Tuivasa on there. We've got Kai Kara France on there. Oh, thank God, Tyson Pedro is back.
Hey.
Grasso Shevchenko 2 is coming up after that. That is in an actual arena in not quite Las Vegas, Nevada. It's not dog shit for a couple months here at least. So, and as I said, this is the first of them. We should probably mention what the card is. We're now 4 minutes in. It's UFC 292 with the main event, a bantamweight title fight between Aljamain Sterling and Sean O'Malley. And co-main eventing this card, a women's strawweight title fight. Zhang Weili defending against Amanda Lemos, but that's not all. Further down on the card, we have a guy that we have long stood up for, and he's needed our protection, really, from the vast sea of just contrarian MMA smarks who have to dislike anyone who's obviously good and fun. And also increasingly likable as a guy. Ian Garry is fighting Neil Magny, who I think he actively called out. Calling out Neil Magny, We like to see that. And, yeah, did you see that video from Garry recently where he was training with Chris Curtis?
Yes.
Which is cool, by the way, to see the two of them training together. And Chris Curtis, like, separated a rib in sparring and then, like, tried to go macho mode. I love Chris Curtis. I think he seems like a cool guy, but he clearly has a temper.
Yes.
Which could make him do some unlikable things. And Garry was, like, the smartest, most compassionate man in the room, and he was the guy sparring Chris. He was like, this is when you be smart, Chris, you know? Now is not the time to be macho. You know, this is how you improve in your career. And let's just take a round off. You're injured. Like, there's no point in being macho. I'm like, wow. Mature Ian Garry. I really enjoyed seeing that. I like the guy, and I love watching him fight, and I'm happy to see him here on this card. Cheeto Vera, Pedro Munoz. There's a lot of stuff to like here. So,
yeah.
Let's just jump in on the main event. We'll talk more about Ian Garry when we get to segment 3. But it's Aljamain Sterling, vindicated, definitely the champion. Everyone has to agree now. He keeps winning these damn fights. Granted, they're close. They're not all super exciting, but you got to acknowledge Aljo's a great fighter, and he is taking on... I mean, this is a weird thing at bantamweight where we have two fighters where I think a lot of people just sort of doubt how good they really are. I have a little harder time saying how valid that is in the case of the challenger, Sean O'Malley. He recently fought, his last fight, in fact, was against Petr Yan, who is enjoying a pretty precipitous decline as a relevant contender, without ever really looking bad, except, well, I suppose in that Dvalishvili fight.
Yes, that was the first time in which you were like, ooh.
Yeah. But, you know, and I think most people thought that he beat Sean O'Malley. Certainly, MMA decisions... What's that?
I didn't.
You didn't?
Not really.
I don't have a strong feeling about it. It's a very close fight. MMA decisions polled, I think, like 29 different media scores, and all but one had Yan winning the fight. I think most fans seem to agree. I watched that fight, and I'm like, how do you judge these rounds? In fact, I'm pretty sure Sean O'Malley wins the first round. That doesn't seem particularly... He just lands better, cleaner shots, in my opinion.
I mean, that means he wins the fight, because he quite clearly wins the third round, as far as I can recall.
That I don't recall, because that is one of those rounds where he lands the most damaging shots, but he also takes a ton of super clean shots in return. He has the advantage of not looking hurt by them, but he gets hit really hard and clean in return, particularly on the counter with Jan's left hook, and then he does spend like 2 minutes on his ass with Jan out grappling him. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of subjectivity there, and then round 2 is full on a swing round, because both guys hurt each other badly. Jan enjoys some grappling, but doesn't get a ton done, although he does land some strikes. I don't know. All I'll say is what it showed is that Sean O'Malley clearly belongs at this level, but it's still difficult to determine how much of that is maybe Jan slipping a bit, Jan coming into fights unfocused and overconfident, and how much of it is also the style matchup. That it seemed in retrospect maybe we should have considered that maybe a guy like Jan just has trouble against somebody like O'Malley, who can do a lot of what like Sandhagen did successfully against him with the lateral movement and the jabbing, but also just, I think, hits harder. It's just a real dangerous sniper, very much in the mold of Conor McGregor, I think deliberately. That maybe Jan is not the guy who's going to have an easy fight with Sean O'Malley with only 3 rounds to work. And whether or not that means anything about a matchup with Aljamain Sterling is still, to me, a huge open question.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things about this one, which has me in a oddly superstitious way kind of concerned, is that, and we've touched on this general dynamic before, is that like for most of Aljamain's UFC title run, people have just been like, well, this guy is a nightmare for Aljamain Sterling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's too physical. Aljo isn't going to be able to out-wrestle him.
Yeah.
And then what's he going to do? You know, this kind of dynamic, you know, this is TJ Dillashaw, you know, has the best takedown defense in, who had the best takedown defense in MMA at one point, or at least in the bantamweight division, let's say. Or this is Petr Yan, who's a savage anti-wrestler, a really good top position grappler in his own right. You know, all of these guys, or, you know, Henry Cejudo, who's just a physically dominating immortal, and people just like, how is Aljamain Sterling going to beat this guy? So, weirdly enough, I find myself thinking, now that everyone seems to be going, well, this stick-like fraud who managed to rob Petr Yan is coming in. Now Aljamain Sterling has got this.
Yeah.
Like,
and I don't think it's fair to call him a fraud. To be clear.
No.
He's extremely annoying. I do not like the man. But I do not think it is fair to let that convince you that he is... I mean, the Yan fight. I don't care what you thought the result was. Very clearly, this dude is tough. He can gas, as we often suspect he will, and then recover. And, yeah, like, he's dangerous. Like, he's clearly a good fighter. It's an interesting point. I mean, I don't know that it's not something that is, like, analyzable, you know?
No.
It's a vibe.
It's just one of those things which, like, it sort of strikes you from a superstitious angle.
Yeah.
Like, because, spoiler warning, I probably am expecting Sterling to beat Petr Yan. I mean, sorry, not Petr Yan, to beat Sean O'Malley. Mm-hmm. But I was expecting Yan to decimate Sean O'Malley.
We both were.
Everything that people had seen before then about, you know, worrying about whether he could keep a pace, whether he was physically durable enough.
Yep.
Like, bits would fall off him. You know, the untested grappling. And not all of those questions were answered, like, in the positive, right?
Sure.
It wasn't all, you know, he didn't have bulletproof grappling. He did get dropped by Petr Yan, all that other kind of stuff. But, yeah, this was something where, like, I do favor Aljamain Sterling for a bunch of fairly obvious reasons, but, like, much less confidently than I favored Petr Yan.
Yeah, I don't see how you can feel otherwise. And maybe the superstition thing is part of it. I found it interesting that Izzy has been saying this about the upcoming fight with Strickland, which I think is kind of wise of him to be wary. He's like, these are the fights you lose. Where you're like, oh, this is definitely the gimme, the, like, between interesting, meaningful fights title defense. Mm-hmm. And those are the fights that you look back in history and people just win those. He compared it to Bisping Rockhold 2 when Bisping had like 4 weeks notice. Yep. It was like, that happens, man. So I have to be cautious. Yeah, I don't suspect that Sterling himself is overlooking Sean O'Malley. But I am probably going to pick him too, and it is largely for pretty obvious reasons. The grappling. Because this was the area in which he definitely did not compete that well with Petr Yan. He exceeded all of our expectations in competing with Yan on the feet. I mean, he got dropped, but he also hurt Yan badly, twice, in the fight. And after getting dropped, which we'll talk about the circumstances surrounding that knockdown, because he was in a kind of bad position in which O'Malley's style often puts him. But when he was like throwing and getting hit in exchanges, he looks like a guy who would be vulnerable to that. When he was not throwing himself out of position on defense, as in the knockdown, but was actually trying to take Jan's head off and got hit in return, he weathered those shots really well. He took some fight enders from Yan in the third round of that fight. Not a mark on him. Didn't stagger. Kept going. So I think the guy kind of has a chin as well. And
yeah, I mean, he's had weird stuff happen to him in the cage.
Yeah,
but I suspect he's just one of these guys like Anthony Pettis, Michael Chandler, and so on.
Yeah.
Where they have incredible chins and like durability to punches, but yeah, there's just going to be times where bits fall off them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other parts of their body.
And that is the thing. He's had a leg injury in 2 fights. I don't know if has he been out with any other injuries?
I'm thinking that he hurt his hand at some point, but that might just be me confusing him with someone else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he did. He was medically suspended for a potential hand injury.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think he's basically someone who collects injuries, which is rarely good long term. But
yeah,
people like Chandler and Pettis were able to claim titles.
He also apparently, this is not a good sign for at the time, like 26-year-old. After his win over Jose Alberto Quinones, which was a fight, by the way, that he popped for steroids. Afterwards, he had hip surgery.
Mm-hmm.
A 25-year-old having hip surgery. That's an old people surgery. Yeah, so there has to be some lingering physical issues with Sean O'Malley, but let's talk about him as a fighter, because I think this is the thing. Like, you just don't want Sean O'Malley to be good because he sucks. He's super annoying. Mm-hmm. He is just like, especially if you're like somebody who thinks of themselves as an old soul, i.e., annoying and out of touch, like me. Then like Sean O'Malley is like the embodiment of like Snapchat, post Snapchat youth generation. They're now on TikTok. They're fucking annoying. He wants to be Conor McGregor, but where Conor McGregor actually had some good lines, Sean O'Malley has like memes about weed. He just sucks. He's a dork, but he's the kind of dork who gets really popular by having a certain amount of swagger. You don't want him to be good. And this prevented a lot of people, including me for a time, until I started seeing like the fight against Chris Moutinho and the fight against Thomas Almeida, where I was like, you know what? Sean O'Malley actually has a sort of technical basis for his game.
Hmm?
That was what I needed, was to see him outside of all these quick knockouts, where he's doing the McGregor thing. You know, he clearly has great timing. He's got good power, and he has super long arms. And he does what McGregor does, which is throwing himself completely out of position because he senses that the distance and the timing is exactly right to knock somebody out. And when I see that, I'm like, I don't know. Is that all you got? I saw those tougher 3-rounders after the loss to Cheeto, and I had to start acknowledging that Sean O'Malley has serviceable technique in a lot of areas of striking. That he has an understanding of like positioning. He can be quite effective even off the back foot because he does not simply like collapse against the cage and try to run away. Instead, he does a good job of keeping himself lined up and threatening, pivoting around the opponent. He has a good jab. He has that excellent timing, but I particularly like Sean O'Malley when he does not throw to knock somebody out. And you see that he is actually a pretty sound and efficient fighter. And I think that's the Sean O'Malley we saw more after the second round against Petr Yan, because he got super tired in that round. And then he came out in round 3 and had to just ease up and put less heat on everything. And suddenly he was much more as he was at the beginning of the fight. Technical, efficient, a lot of small movements, nothing overthrown, and keeping his balance. And I like watching that Sean O'Malley fight. He's good. But? Do you have a butt or should I have a butt?
You have a butt. I thought you were going somewhere with
this. I'm just appraising Sean O'Malley's like genuinely well put together boxing game. Like there's a lot of fundamental solid shit in what Sean O'Malley does. I wish he relied on it more.
I think so. Also, a lot of his physical attributes probably a little. I think people have underrated how tough he is. That is certainly, I think, probably the biggest thing that I found in the Yarn fight was just that he kept going. As I said, I thought the third round was. I think all three judges gave O'Malley the third round, and given that Yarn is the infamous, super adapter who just downloads everyone and just gets better over time and so on. I thought that was genuinely very, very impressive.
Yeah, it was O'Malley who adapted. He found the knee. Like, he had to figure out a way around Yarn's defense because earlier I think he hit Yarn early because he was wary of Yarn's desire to counter, and so he was able to throw a feint at him and then crack him while he was trying to size. He was just standing there in range. And then Yarn started being really, really heavy on his defense, keeping his hands super tight, and suddenly O'Malley's 1-1-2s, which is like most of his offense, they just weren't really getting through. And Yarn was looking to extend his attacks and then counter him when he was finally out of position. He had to find that step-in knee off the jabs and feints. It was him who successfully adjusted and had the most impactful moment of round 3. So, credit to him. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. So, in the McGregor comparison, I do think that, McGregor, he is someone who really benefits from being the bigger man.
Absolutely.
McGregor has never been the same fighter at lightweight that he was at welterweight, with the sole exception being against Eddie Alvarez, someone that he was quite a good deal bigger than.
Much bigger than, yeah.
And I do think that a lot of O'Malley's success is a similar kind of thing, in that he can usher people into space where he can throw long, accurate, straight punches, and hits really hard with them.
Yep.
Against height parity, which is going to be something that he's fairly close to here. I'm not sure that that's going to work as well. His fight against Cheeto, for example, despite the fact that his leg fell off and it was weird, he didn't look all that comfortable fighting someone who was pretty much as big as him.
And there's also the weirdness of his performance against Pedro Munoz, who was much shorter than him, but who simply did not get into punching range. And O'Malley sort of didn't seem to know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. He just let him kick him a bunch.
Yep. Secondarily, there's the occasionally somewhat aimless cagecraft. Again, I think he's fairly insulated by being someone who knows he can hurt people as soon as they step into his range. So he's not all that concerned with where he is in the cage.
Yeah.
A lot of the Yarn fight was him landing shots whilst being backed up, which again, to his credit, he was able to do against a very dangerous pressure fighter. But as you said, a lot of it was him successfully chasing Yarn back out of the pocket with 1-1-2s.
Yeah. But I do think this is the area that most surprised me when he first started getting tested in longer fights, is that a lot of those fights were him off the back foot. He actually deals with pressure fighters much better than I would have expected him to.
Yep.
Again, I think that's why a big part of why he hit Yarn so much and managed to hurt him, whereas Pedro Munoz just kind of boxed him out, because Yarn was trying to get into range the whole time.
Yeah.
A lot of opportunities for a sniper like O'Malley.
Yeah. So, one of the questions is, how does Aljo's defense hold up against O'Malley? Because Aljo is a very odd fighter.
Yes.
He doesn't have good defense, but he is almost always doing something defensively.
Yes.
He is always taking his head off the center line, to the extent that it can heavily compromise his position. He will turn his head away, sometimes literally run out of the pocket kind of thing.
Yep.
But he is always doing defensive things, whereas I think a lot of what got Jan into trouble was him being convinced that he could, narrowly slip something like a 1-1-2 from a very long-rangey fighter and then counter him, and it wasn't necessarily the case.
Mm-hmm.
Aljo's ability to kind of to work his way inside off like big exaggerated slips. Admittedly, this got him, KO'd by Marlon Rice, and as that is one of O'Malley's primary range weapons, is just big kicks to the body. You can certainly see that kind of thing happening.
And O'Malley does have a good high kick. He doesn't pull it out all the time, but he has landed it on numerous opponents, including Petr Yan.
Mm-hmm. I do think he will be slightly more. I do think he will be slightly more reticent to throw it against someone like Aljo for obvious reasons. He doesn't want to get taken down.
Sure.
But I think essentially a lot of this comes down to like Sandhagen-esque dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we talked about Sandhagen when he was going to fight Aljo, we were like, the main problems here are that Sandhagen backs up to the fence, often almost immediately in fights, and that he turns his back in grappling exchanges.
Yeah.
And Aljo just immediately took him down and choked him out because that's what he does. Yep. He looks for people to give up their back to get away, and then he kills them for it.
Aljo characteristically starts super hot in fights, too. He is often very, very aggressive right off the jump.
Yeah, he is someone who has a very good grasp of where he should be in the cage generally, and how he should be approaching his opponents.
True.
It's that he can't maintain it that is the real issue. But yeah, he's always picking the right directional choice. But yeah, so a lot of O'Malley's defense against Jan was turning his back and fighting grips to get out of takedowns, rolling out of grappling positions.
Yeah.
All the kind of stuff that we were saying that Sandhagen does that would get him into huge amounts of trouble against Sterling.
He went for that switch a lot, which allowed Jan to take his back multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's difficult to see. It's difficult to see O'Malley not doing that against Sterling.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen any particularly rigorous cagecraft from him in any of his fights. So you have to say at least on the there's I think at the very least O'Malley finds himself in a 1 or 2 round hole in this fight unless he lands the biggest shot of his life.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing being that Sterling has a pretty good chin.
He does.
He's not Chito Vera, but no one is.
Many fighters would have been knocked out by the shot that knocked him out. Marlon Moraes, a high kick, which was in fact a full power round knee right to the face that he moved into. Yeah. I mean, that's a knockout shot, and that's the only time he's been stopped.
Yep.
Otherwise, he's quite durable. The Munoz fight, he took a ton of damage, and no worse for the wear.
Yep. The Cejudo fight was, and that was another thing. People have criticisms of Sterling as like a boring fighter or whatever. I thought the Cejudo fight was really fun.
I agree. It
was a really good, well contested, pretty violent fight.
It's only boring because grappling sucks. So watching him beat Jan was fascinating live. Oh my god, he's doing it. But it's not a fight that you're desperate to rewatch. But Sterling. Especially when he either quickly finishes somebody or cannot simply out-grapple them, I think is routinely a very fun fighter. His fight with Rivera was fun. His fight with Munoz is a classic. And the first fight with Jan was great. So I'm with you.
The last thing of why I tend to favor Sterling is that he's also a big kicker.
Yes.
And O'Malley is he's just a kickable man.
Yes.
Jan sort of stayed away from it for some reason. I think, just because he was like, I'm going to knock this stupid pothead out.
It was clearly part of his plan early. He really was trying to kick the legs. He kind of, the great adjuster sort of got distracted, actually, and got away
I think he got
from
mad.
Yeah. But yeah, he should have stayed on that because he was giving O'Malley a lot of trouble, even not landing them super clean because he had to constantly think about it. It made it more difficult for him to work his jab because Zhang was very clearly ready to just catch a jab and crack him in the leg as he pivoted.
And I think, Sterling is a very willing kicker. I think his kicks against Cejudo were essentially what allowed him to maintain at least some level of cardio parity down the stretch in that fight.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily expect him to do super badly on the feet. I think there's obviously always big chances that that O'Malley will just lace him down the middle. But I do find myself thinking like it seems like quite a favourable matchup for Aljamain Sterling, and
it does.
Once again, that does leave me oddly concerned.
Yep. No, I co-sign pretty much all of that. I mean, the interesting thing here is that it seems so sensible for Sterling to just rush O'Malley like he did Sandhagen and pressure him. But this will come with the cost of, if he doesn't finish him, he might tire out before O'Malley. And also pressuring O'Malley, as we saw against Jan, is not really the best way to not get hit a bunch by him.
Yep.
Whereas Munoz, much smaller, should have a massive reach disadvantage, but just was patient and kicked O'Malley without committing to much, and enjoyed a ton of really just easy success. A lot of just free attritive damage from long range. So I think this is... Yeah, it makes sense to go out there and try to out-grapple him immediately, but then maybe you view it as a fallback, that if you have to, you can kind of get on your bike and recover and work your kicks.
Whatever he has to do, it's not the Piotr Jan 1 game plan, where it's just like, man, I need to rush this guy and take him down immediately all the time.
Yeah, and sticking to that, if it doesn't... One rush, do you get his back? Do you bank around or submit him? But I think, it seems like it would be foolish to commit so heavily to pressure that you can't just sort of... I think against O'Malley, you can afford to ease up and give him space. Because he is just not as sophisticated coming forward. He's got fantastic timing, and he's willing to overthrow to reach you from further away than you think he can. Again, very much like Conor McGregor. But he is not the pressure fighter McGregor was. And he doesn't recover as well from putting himself in those bad positions because I don't think he has that level of athleticism that McGregor had. He's a little more cumbersome after that first layer or two of offense and has to kind of reset. And he's super duper kickable, as you said. So you gotta pick Sterling. But we have paid for underrating Sean O'Malley before, and I won't make that mistake again. I don't think we are here. I think he's super accurate. He's got great timing. He hits hard. He does not have the advantage of fighting some little short guy here, but neither does Sterling. Who has largely fought little dudes throughout his career, and probably that has made his boxing and kickboxing look better than they are. And it is just the fact that Piotr Jan managed to get him down and indeed get to his back multiple times that makes it really hard to not see how Sterling can't at least bank a few rounds, if not, being a significantly better submission artist than Jan, just outright finish him from one of those positions. So you got to pick Sterling, right?
Yeah, you can't have to. There's always the chance that Sterling has said he wants to move up. He's had his own documented injury issues. His neck has been troubling him for a while. But honestly, he's looked great in his last few fights.
He has.
And yeah, whatever they are, they're not showing up in the cage.
Yeah, he looks great. Give Marab a chance, though. Do move up, Give Marab a shot.
Yeah. I mean, he said that he's 99.9% going to do it. I hope he does. I'd like to see him test himself, and it'd be interesting. What if he goes up to 145 and he's just, the Aljamain Sterling that can win the first round all the time, and then he can just keep doing that. He just has
that would be great.
At 145.
That would be great. He seems durable enough. Maybe he'll feel a lot faster. He's not the quickest guy at bantamweight, but that'll be a little different. I would love to see it. Why not?
Yeah.
Anyway, both.
So I think O'Malley has to really go up kind of another level after this.
Yep.
After that Yarn fight. Again, I was genuinely very impressed by that fight. I did think actually Sean O'Malley won it. Even if he didn't win it, I think he did more damage.
Sure.
Showed adaptation, toughness, anything you would want to see if you like Sean O'Malley, which I don't.
Yeah, everything that you're disappointed to see when you feel about O'Malley the way we do. Damn it. Damn it, he's kind of good. Yeah, that is exactly my feeling. All right, both picking Sterling by default, and that ends I think, justifiably long first segment. Two very interesting fighters here, two weird fighters, and well worth discussing in depth. Next up, the women's strawweight title is on the line. Zhang Weili defending against Amanda Lemos. Later on, as I mentioned at the top, we will be getting to Ian Garry versus Neil Magni. We're going to try to do Chito Vera, Pedro Munoz as well. Hell, maybe we'll even shed a tear about the fate of Chris Weidman, who is making his return to the title path. He's coming back, folks. He's going to get that belt back. That's for later. After this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are now discussing the co-main event of this UFC pay-per-view card. That is Zhang Weili, the defending women's strawweight champion, and she is taking on, or rather, the challenger who is taking her on, is Amanda Lemos. And Phil, we were both just trying to find, what we feel about the fight, as we often do. This is a little how the sausage is made for our listeners. Sometimes, when we're not talking about movies and books and bands we've seen, we actually talk about what we're going to say between the segments. And I'm giving too much away. The conclusion we came to, which is really no conclusion, is you said, it may sound weird, but I'm still not sold on Zhang Weili. And I said, I'm not really sold on Amanda Lemos. So here we go.
And I was like, oh, of course. Yes, why would you be?
Yeah.
But general.
And I somewhat share your feelings about Zhang Weili as well. So this is a fight which seems like it's guaranteed to be pretty damn fun, which is not entirely easy to suss out, largely because I'm still not 100% sure how... They're good, but how deep are the games? How deep are the games of these two fighters?
Yes. Clearly referencing a famous British boy band, Take That. And
you said that to make me mad, didn't you? You're saying this to make me mad, obviously.
Is it working?
Yes. Even though I fully know what's happening. I'm like, you put some respect on the Bee Gees' name, you piece of shit. Yeah. So...
yes. So... I mean, to me, what Amanda Lemos represents is the slow, welling in to the strawweight division of like high athleticism fighters.
Right.
Gone are the days where it was just basically Claudia Gadelha is athletic for a round.
Right.
Joanna Jędrzejczyk is big.
Right.
And Andrade is athletic but completely formless and powerful. I think just in general, we are getting slowly we are getting a higher level of athlete coming into the division.
Lemos is precisely what you think of when you think of a fighter whose game is built on the fact that they are fast and agile and coordinated and powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same is true of Zhang Weili, but I mean, just the thing is that like that's not going to be as much of a distinguishing factor as it has been for Zhang Weili's career. As mentioned, like she had a significant athletic edge on Joanna. I think both times they fought.
Yep.
But Joanna is just like crafty and tough and just big.
Yep.
Big for the weight class. But that insulation is kind of going away. I mean, Rose is always such a weird example because she's such a flake. But she is obviously quite physically... she's very physically gifted, but it's hard to look at her and say, like, this is what you want out of an MMA athlete, just someone who's...
Right.
Because mostly you want someone who is just dumb tough.
She's a good athlete, but more funneled into specific sort of gifts and not... Lemos is just, like, broadly in the way that, like, Jose Aldo was. Just a superior athlete. And Weili, and Zhang Weili as well.
Yeah, or in just like the way that, good divisions like lightweight and welterweight just have...
Yeah, chock full of these fighters.
They just have lots of people who are just tough and athletic.
Yep.
So there haven't really been that many people that Zhang Weili has fought that she couldn't just kind of throw out of the cage.
Yep.
And when she has fought them, it's generally been a bit, it's been somewhat tough for her. Joanna, obviously, by the time they fought the second time, was pretty shot.
Yep.
Jessica Andrade, that was a big, wild exchange where Andrade got thumped in a way which feels a lot more familiar now than it did back when it happened.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I mean, Carla Esparza is the greatest example of this. It is impossible to see Carla Esparza being champion in the strawweight division of, a year or, a few years from now, I would guess.
Within the last 5 years, basically, when she wasn't champion, despite beating a lot of other good fighters, Carla Esparza does not have that level of just physicality. Mm-hmm. And I say this as Carla Esparza's one and only fan.
I mean, for sure. We've mentioned this many times between us. Like, this is immense credit to her that despite being undersized and, underpowered, that she's a two-time strawweight champion.
Which somebody used to insult me, by the way, when I posted a picture of me and my girlfriend last week. For the first time ever. And they were like, I suddenly understand why you like unathletic fighters who overperform. Yeah.
Mean.
It was funny, too. I don't disagree. I love my fellow overachievers. So all of this is to say that these two are elite athletes. Like, there is no question about that. They are elite athletes on par with the best men's divisions. That kind of physicality. I would say that in part because of that, and this is the reason for our doubts about them. They have gotten away with a lot in this division, and have gotten away without having to develop particularly deep skill sets. They may both have Jose Aldo athleticism, but neither of them has Jose Aldo's game. because Jose Aldo couldn't just be a good athlete. He had to get good. As you said, Zhang Weili has... A lot of her fights have been defined by her being able to fling women around. She's clearly a dangerous striker. She's powerful. She's fast. She can take a huge beating. And she's got some craftiness there, some feel for exchanges. But a lot of her fights are defined by her ability to out-wrestle and out-grapple people. And she clearly likes to do that. She likes to do a little bit of everything. Lemos, I think, much more wants to knock people out. And she will, guillotine them, given the chance. She will go for a quick rear naked choke, given the chance. But she wants to have a slower-paced, sort of sniping battle, relying on her speed and her power from long to middle range.
Yes.
So... how does that balance out for you? I mean,
yeah, this is.
Go on.
Yeah, this is my concern. Is that I've actually felt fairly positive about Lemos' developments as she's continued, to sort of rise through the ranks from a technical standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But I do worry that she's. As you sort of alluded to, she's not really. She hasn't picked up on one of the major elements of fighting in the UFC, and more specifically, fighting at one of the small person divisions, which is pace.
Yes.
Her game is probably more functionally well built at this point. I think her ability to play off the jab, she can low kick,
yep.
She can counter punch. She does appear to be a genuinely good top position grappler. But yeah, I just don't know whether she's ready to hang with someone who can actually fight at a high pace. And the next question is, do I trust Zhang Weili to enforce a high pace? Again, I'm not really sure. What I'd really expect from her is for her to, mostly her best performances have come from when people have tried to meet her. And this is obviously, Jędrzejczyk is the classic example of this. Jędrzejczyk cannot try to not win every exchange. Jędrzejczyk has to be dictating, and so whenever she got into trouble, she would try and force her way through the exchanges, which would lead Zhang to have her best game show itself, which is her ability to just throw powerful volume in the pocket.
Yeah.
But mostly from the outside, a lot of Zhang's game is just probing probing lead leg kicks, which she's then going to try and counterpunch off.
Yeah. She clearly likes to counter. She has a sort of less sophisticated Lyoto Machida approach. Picking away, touching, here's something that is quick but looks like maybe an opening. Also, if you don't do anything about it, I'm just going to keep doing it. I
actually think of it a lot as being Gaia Rodriguez. That she's pecking away from kicks at range, and then people close in to counter her.
Yeah.
And then suddenly she just wails on them with 50 hooks.
Right. Yeah, but she does not have... I do agree that Lemos' boxing from that range, I think, is just a lot more consistent. Namely because she is a jabber. She's got a good, powerful jab. She positions herself for it well. It's so that it has the effect of appearing to be surprisingly long without her overextending. She was in there against Marina Rodriguez, was out jabbing her. And she wasn't reaching for her. She wasn't falling off balance. She was just, she knows how to line up her jab. She gets past that lead foot. She looks down the center line and is like, oops, there it is. But she does not know how to throw combinations unless she's finishing someone. She's Cyril Gahn. She will go absolutely ballistic when she has somebody hurt, but otherwise she almost never puts even 2 punches together. Like, frequently, if she's throwing her right hand, it's a feint that precedes it. It's not even a jab. And this leads to her being a quick and surprising pot shotter, but that is really all she is, as a striker, is a pot shotter. And, yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. Like, it's not a big sample size. I don't know how predictive it was, but, Zhang Weili did get just KO'd by the pot-shotting Rose Namajunas. Just sort of waiting for her to do something. And she did something, and it knocked her out. But also, it's just tough to really count on a pot-shotting style in the modern MMA era, especially given that there's so much else that Zhang Weili is going to be trying to do. She's going to try to body lock Lemos, and I mean, I don't know. Do you have any particular feeling on Lemos's takedown defense? It hasn't been tested a ton.
Yeah, I mean, weirdly enough, I feel there's a lot of parity between these two, a lot of similarities in their styles. I think, again, both of them are just like hugely physical, and that's been a lot of their takedown defense. Because that was the other big part of Zhang versus Namajunas, was just Rose's ability to take Zhang down and then work her over. Well, actually not work her over, but just like keep her down there.
That's true.
Yeah,
similarly, much less strong fighter, Namajunas. Again, physically imposing in her own ways, but she shouldn't have the strength to take down Zhang Weili. You're right. It reveals how much her scrambling and wrestling and everything are built on her physicality.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like Lemos, similarly, like she's obviously a huge threat from top position, from like her own in terms of her own grappling game, but certainly not bulletproof takedown defense or like, I mean, she got arm triangled standing by Jessica Andrade.
Yeah.
Again, I think a lot of it is just the assumption that she is the superior, more powerful grappler in every situation because she's always the more powerful person when she's training with people.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I do just have the sort of inescapable conclusion that, like, two fighters who both their takedown defense and their offense. I mean, it's not that Zhang doesn't have good timing, and it's not that she doesn't, like, fight hard in layers to finish her takedowns. She does. But even that, I think, is highly dependent on her physicality, her ability to take people down. That she just gets to a strong position. And so it's a question of, somebody who doesn't get taken down often because they're strong, and somebody who gets takedowns often because they're strong. And the like sort of dumb guy analysis I have to fall back on is like, then I just favor the one who's going to go for the takedown to maybe get one, to maybe get a few of them. And I don't know. Lemos also has athletic escapes. Like on the few occasions she has been taken down, she just gives up position. And credit to her for scrambling, but Zhang is a very smooth scrambler because she's so athletic. Her scrambles against Carla Esparza, I mean, again, there's a huge gulf there in physicality, but she was just all over her. Every move she tried to make, her own top position game is very difficult to get away from. With the flip side being that against Rose Namajunas, she appeared to have no idea of what to do off of her back.
Yeah, the one thing is that I came into this and I was like, this is going to be a war. This is going to be like...
I was just having this...
J-Chick. Zhang, but like with people, between two people that have that physicality. The more we have discussed this fight, the more I realize it's probably very untrue. We're looking at like two super athletes pecking from range, being like, eventually you're going to come in, my super athlete approach is going to screw you up enough that you're going to come into my wheelhouse and I'm going to destroy you for it.
Yeah.
And that might just be the fight.
Yeah. Literally as you began saying that, I had just been I was like, I'm going to pause. I'm going to let Phil talk here. And in my head, I was thinking, when I get the next chance to speak, I'm going to say, you know what? This might suck. This might be two people whose games just sort of bounce off of each other, where Zhang Weili is like, you do something. And Lemos is like, okay, what if I do something once a minute? Yeah. I mean, the thing is like, I think this is a matchup where it would make a lot of sense for Zhang Weili to be a little more aggressive. Because Lemos is such a one and done. Like, Zhang Weili is not technically perfect or even particularly sharp in pocket with her like pocket punching mechanics, but she's down to do it. You know, she's pretty comfortable in that range, as you saw against Jędrzejczyk. It was circumstantial. Jędrzejczyk had to initiate almost all of those sequences. But it did show she can hang in there with somebody who is just firing straight back and uncork 4 or 5 punch combos. That is something I have never seen Lemos do. When Angela Hill was pressing her with combinations, she was getting kind of overwhelmed by them. You know, she would fire back, but everything she does is pretty one and done. But I don't really trust Weili to do that because I don't think it's her game. I think
that's one of the things that we sort of talked about around the Namajunas fight is that obviously it's Rose Namajunas. The way you fight this person is to keep consistent pressure on them.
Yeah.
That is obvious.
And she didn't do that at all.
She just didn't. Yeah, she was just like, no, I can pot shot it with her at range.
And she did quite well at it. I mean, she had an adjusted approach, and she was pretty effective from range. But she did not, with the obvious conclusion being, maybe you should press her. She didn't even really try.
Yeah.
All the aggression in Zhang Weili's game is on the counter, or it is in the form of wrestling and grappling.
Yes, which means that I think we are looking at a shockingly pot-shotty fight here.
Very well could be the case. And who do you pick there? I don't know.
You know what? I'm going to pick Amanda Lemos.
Sure.
You know why?
Why is that?
Because Zhang gets punched when she's standing on one leg due to her, as I said, her primary range offense being lead leg front, lead leg kicking. She gets punched on one leg all the time. Most specifically, Collar Esparza did this a whole bunch to her.
Yeah.
Collar Esparza would just land a super clean counterpunch whilst Zhang was standing on one leg. And Joanna Jędrzejczyk also obviously did this a bunch. She just countered the low kicks with punches. And the difference was that against Esparza, obviously, Zhang was like, this didn't do anything because it's Carla Esparza. And against Jędrzejczyk would follow it up with further punches and would then end up with an exchange, and Zhang would have a decent chance of just driving her out of the pocket just by wailing on her.
Yeah.
Lemos is just like a sharp, hard, powerful puncher as well. So I'm just going to pick her to
It makes sense to me. Yeah, she's a much harder hitter than either of these women, and it may in fact work in her favor that she's not going to extend the exchanges. She's going to try to get in that one shot and reset.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, she's a more natural. She's obviously nothing. She's not Joanna in terms of her all-around game, but she's a more natural counterpuncher than Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Oh yeah. In
terms of her timing and her commitment, not just her power, but she has genuinely good timing. I just think she's going to be able to sit Zhang down a bunch of times and potentially lower her volume below what even it should be.
Yeah, I am gonna. That makes sense to me. I'm gonna pick Zhang Weili because of two things. She's going to try to do something that isn't that fight as often as she's able. She's going to try to body lock Lemos and fling her around. And I think this will make Lemos gas.
That is a good point.
Zhang Weili does not gas.
That's a very good point.
She has been in some absolutely insane fights, both in the striking and the grappling, and she just keeps pushing. And Lemos flagged badly against Angela Hill, and really only, questionably won that fight. I don't think it's a bad decision per se, but it was very close and could have gone either way. And really got to the point where she picked up the decision because Angela Hill herself slowed down, as she often does. But if Zhang just can't enforce that pace with enough grappling and wrestling offense, I see no reason to think that Lemos is just going to hit her with the cleaner shots in worse positions. So yeah.
I think it's a really tough fight for me to call, to be honest.
I feel exactly the same.
I think there's a lot of similarities between the two. I do hope that we're wrong. I hope that it doesn't suck. I would like it to be more like my initial thoughts of what it was going to be like. An athletic version of Zhang and Jacek would be fantastic. If it was like a kind of Lawler Hendricks kind of.
Yeah, but I just don't think that is. I do not think that is Lemos's want to press that kind of fight on somebody, and I don't think it's Weili Zhang's. Weili Zhang will respond to that approach, but will she create that fight out of thin air? I think the evidence says no.
Yeah, even going back and looking at Jędrzejczyk Zhang 1, I think Zhang was much more willing to initiate exchanges than she is now.
Yeah.
She was very aggressive in that fight, even in the ones with the exchanges which Jędrzejczyk wasn't creating herself. I do feel like, but everything since then does speak to her as being sadly, a little bit more capital T technical.
Yeah, she should go for it. She's got a broader game. She's got, she's just more down for the war. I think fundamentally, she should go for it, but. If she doesn't, I think we're looking at a very nip-tuck and not particularly compelling kind of range fight.
Yep.
We'll see. All right. Well, let's take a break on that note. When we come back, Ian Garry, Neil Magni, Chito Vera, Pedro Munoz, and something else possibly. After this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are. But no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Ian Machado, Garry, taking on Neil Magni. And I love this. Garry, as I recall, called out Magni specifically, which is such a savvy move. Because I look at this and I'm like, oh, Ian Garry's going to win. And yet I also feel respect for him for calling out Neil Magni, right? He's having his cake and eating it too, at least as far as my extremely important opinion of him goes. And but I do just like Ian Garry. Increasingly as a guy, as a personality, I like him. I think a lot of people agree. He's sort of stopped doing the I'm Conor McGregor shtick.
No, he hasn't.
Well, it's stopped being all. Let's put it this way: it has stopped being all we've seen of him.
Yeah, that is true.
We're getting more exposure to Ian Garry.
He did also he said something recently where this is the two halves of Ian Garry thing. On the one hand, you have the Chris Curtis thing where he was look after yourself, Chris Curtis. Don't do stupid things. Look, you're going to make it to a title one day. Showing genuine wisdom and good friendship and compassion. Yes.
Yeah.
But then also he was like, I'm the reason anyone's tuning into UFC 292. I'm carrying this card. Oh. It's just like, shut up, Ian Garry. Stop getting in your own way. Like, the person you are is fine.
Yeah.
Like, people like that.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, to be fair, like, it's understandable. Like, people like it, but to become a star as somebody who is merely likable is really very difficult in the modern UFC. Like,
yeah, I mean, any combat sport, it takes an extremely long amount of time.
Exactly. If you're going to be a Gennady Golovkin or a George St. Pierre, I mean, I'm not comparing their styles, but you're going to be one of these figures who is widely regarded as a pretty cool guy, and everyone loves you, and you are a superstar. You have to be so fucking good for so long to earn that cred. Whereas if you're just an asshole, braggadocious and arrogant and cocky, people will pay attention to you because they love you and admire you, or because they hate you right away, as long as you're pretty good. Like, look how quickly Sean O'Malley became a staple.
Yep.
Granted, he's been in the UFC for quite some time at this point. It's been like 4 or 5 years or something, but
he hasn't been super active.
No, he hasn't. Probably because he's
and this was a similar dynamic with Conor McGregor. Is that he fought a few times, and then literally he had to take a year off because his knee exploded in the Holloway fight.
He didn't take as much time off as it seemed he should have.
What's that?
He didn't take as much time off as it seemed he should have. I do remember at the time being like, "You're going to return in 9 months or something." I think it was a pretty quick turnaround, to be fair.
Well, no, he was out a solid year, I think. But during that time, he was still all that people were talking about.
Absolutely,
pretty much.
Yeah,
all that anyone was calling out.
So I get it, but I agree. I like Ian Garry being Ian Garry, and I don't think he's being Ian Garry when he's taking the mic or promoting a fight.
No.
I don't blame him for it. It doesn't make me dislike him, but I don't care about it at all. Fortunately, Ian Garry is also a good fighter who is a ton of fun to watch. So this is something in his favor. You and I, from pretty early on, people were, I think, resisting. And I get that. I'm that way too. I'm a prove it kind of guy when it comes to any kind of media I'm consuming. Why should I like you? But you and I we watched early Ian Garry fights and we're like, this guy's got some skill.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty sharp and he's crafty, and you can see him coming up with generating new ideas as the fight goes on, and he's got some flash, some flair as well. So there has long been a lot to like about Ian Garry, and I cannot say anything but positive things, really, about how he has performed as his level of competition has gone up. He's fought some tough dudes, and a couple of those were tough fights. One that shouldn't have been tough had a tough moment, which is something good to see because he overcame it with ease and did even better after that tough moment against Song Kenan. Other fights, like against Daniel Rodriguez, that looked like they should be tough fights, he just aced them. Just knew exactly what he needed to do and wiped out a good opponent. He has... And that awesome fight with Green. What's Green's first name? The caveman.
Gabriel Green.
Gabriel Green was the first time I was like, okay, I don't just sort of secretly, guiltily enjoy Ian Garry more than my peers. I think he's good.
Yes.
And he has not disappointed me since then. So he gets it both ways here. I'm going to pick him against Neil Magny because... he's long and hard-hitting. He is a good combination puncher. He works the body. He really, really understands how his initial strikes and his feints will create positions that set up the rest of his offense. He is thinking past the first clash against his opponents. And this does not look like the kind of person who will panic themselves into an immediate clinch with Neil Magny, which is really the way that most good fighters lose to him, is by simply making a terrible decision.
Yeah. unless they're wrestlers, and that's what they should be doing.
Sure.
But yes.
And then they beat him because they're actually good at that.
Yeah, so the main reason why I'm relatively confident in Garry is that I know that he's a tape study fiend.
Yeah.
That was one of the big things about that Rodriguez fight,
Yep.
in that, to multiple people before that fight, he was like, I am going to knock this man out with a right high kick.
Yep.
If I did it any other way, it was an accident, and I didn't mean to do it. Like, he is...
It wasn't just
again, another thing
swag.
to like about him. He's a real student of the game. He looks at people very carefully. And I think it is... it would be difficult to see someone like that looking at someone like Neil Magny and being like, man, you know what I should do in this fight?
Yeah.
It's takedown time. What little you've seen of his approaches, like, when he was fighting Rodriguez, mostly did just like a good job of fighting grips, disengaging, did not get locked up with someone who is a big, powerful welterweight. Entirely, stayed at range, picking away at him, and knew that Rodriguez's effective range is actually quite short, despite the fact that he's very big. It's mostly, counter hooks, and he's quite foot slow, and that he could be picked off from the outside, and that is exactly what he did. And to be honest, I'm almost certain that he knows that about Neil Magny as well. That, like, despite the fact that Neil Magny is huge and throws out the jab and so on, that Magny is actually quite vulnerable at that range.
Yes.
And Magny is a dangerous clinch fighter and top position grappler and a decent takedown artist generally by the cage. He's not one who can initiate those kind of clinches on his own terms.
Right. John Jones-esque in that regard.
Yes. I do expect Garry to just kind of work him over from range. I think, as you said, it's a savvy call out, and it makes you. It does, make you think about the other ways things could have gone, because there's the. As you said, like, Garry is kind of a bit like the Sean O'Malley of this division. He's the one that people don't want to like. They don't want him to be the good one. And I think the hipster's darling is Jack Della Maddalena in the welterweight division.
I'll tell you right now, I think I'd pick Garry over Della Maddalena.
More than that, I would be very, very worried about Jack Della Maddalena against Neil Magny.
Yeah.
Seeing his grappling decisions in his last fight.
100%.
Where he was fighting someone and just could not stop initiating grappling exchanges with them.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he was utterly torching them on the feet. I was like, this is the exact kind of mentality that Neil the Hypnotoad Magny draws people into.
Jack Della Maddalena just hears by default anyway. He's been hit in the head so many times. All he needs is one glance, one charged glance from Neil Magny, and he's like, oh, God, there's so many stupid things I shouldn't do against this man. Yeah, it's just I'm with you on all that. Just a couple points before we move on, that it was not just swagger. We said this at the time. Behind that, this is why we're impressed with it. The Rodriguez, like, calling his shot. It was, I think there was an element in that fight of him sort of manufacturing that KO which is cool, because he had said that's what he was going to do. But he knew to manufacture it because he had studied the tape, and he saw that Rodriguez would slip that way and would respond by extending his hands to a lot of the probing shots that Garry led with. So, and that he dutifully established the threat by also working his body with the kicks. So, I think, yes, he went into that fight thinking, I said I was going to do this. I'm going to make it happen. But I don't think he would have called that shot if he didn't know exactly what the process was to make it happen. So it was smart. It showed his ability to study an opponent and pick up on things and recognize what openings he could exploit. And I think it is in his favor also against Neil Magny that, like, you know, like when the Leech fell into the Hypnotoad trap, he was doing fine against Magny, you know, on the feet, but he was not efficient. He had to expend a lot of energy just to make up the range. And Ian Garry is not short and is especially good, as I said at the top of this segment, he's especially good at using his little bits of initiative to get himself into position and to get his opponent out of position. He probes with the lead foot, he feints with the jab and fires his jab, and he uses these little initiative-grabbing tools the way you should, to take small steps and set himself up so that he is not reaching or overextending on what he does next. Or to get himself to a superior angle so that what he does next cannot be easily avoided, or uses initiative to force the opponent to make some kind of like positional concession, to give up an angle, to overreact to some threat, whatever. He's really, really good at seeing further down the sort of chain of an attack, of an exchange, and that's why I think he is a smart striker, a principled, fundamentally sound striker that I really enjoy watching. Just to double check, he is 6'3", according to Wikipedia, with a reach of 74.5. I think he's one of those guys who has surprisingly short arms for his height.
Because Magni is like in the 80s, right?
He's also 6'3", but he has 80-inch reach. But I do think that Garry is going to be on height parity. He's going to be looking straight at his target, and he is just that much better at knowing his range from the outset and establishing it and finding it using the jab and the feints. That I don't have any reason to think until I see it that he is going to make some terrible catastrophic decision here. I think he's just going to push Magni to the fence and stay at long range or middle distance and pick him apart.
Yeah, I think this might be one of those ones where Neil Magny, for as tough as he is, just gets smoked.
Yeah, like Lorenz Larkin did to him, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right, both confidently picking Garry. We'll see. I just enjoy watching the guy fight. You know, I don't care how annoying he might be in the promos. I like him. Good fighter, and I am excited to see this one. Maybe after this, they should do Garry versus who's the guy that you inexplicably don't like?
There's so many of them.
The big, tall welterweight. God damn it. It starts with an R. I think he's Kazakh or from Uzbekistan, maybe. Come on. What's his name?
What? I've completely forgotten. I don't hate anyone.
Go. All right. We're going to move on to the next one. And then at some point I'm going to interrupt and be like, this is his name. Because I'm going to be searching it while you tell us about the main card opener, Chito Vera versus Pedro Munoz.
This is going to be a comical size disparity.
Yeah. Truly.
That's pretty much it. Like, I found myself thinking, like, what's Pedro going to do in this fight to Chito? Can he reach him?
Yeah.
To punch him?
Especially modern Pedro Munoz, who doesn't really tend to get in people's faces, which seems like, I mean, that would be dangerous against Chito, but at least it would let him get shots in. Otherwise, as we mentioned before about the Sean O'Malley fight, he tends to be like a jab and kick man these days from very long range.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's an odd one. Because I can sort of see Chito giving away rounds in the same way that essentially Sean O'Malley did.
Yeah.
You know, for exactly the same reason, is that he'll just wait for Pedro to give him something, and then Pedro will simply low kick him a whole bunch.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there's just such a physical disparity between the two of them in terms of their size. Cheeto can presumably just clinch up with him and overpower him. Cheeto's also Cheeto's quite a good jabber and low kicker himself. Should he decide to actually do it at some point. So yeah, I mostly favor him just for being like twice Pedro's size.
Yeah.
And being completely unhurtable.
That's pretty much how I feel. It's Shavkat Rachmanov, by the way.
I don't mind Shavkat Rachmanov.
Well, you liked him after his last fight because it was a banger. You were questioning his decision makings, and I wasn't entirely disagreeing with you before that. He was sort of like, what is this guy's game? What's he trying to do in there? He just like randomly finishes people, you said.
Yeah, that is true. I still kind of feel like that.
Yeah. His fight with Jeff Neal, all-timer, though. Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, you can't... He's like box office gold.
He's amazing.
Well, not necessarily... But he's incredibly exciting.
Yes. Anyway,
absolutely no one.
I was saying I'd love to see him and Ian Garry fight if Garry gets past Magni. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
That sounds awesome. Anyway, yeah, I agree. It is largely a size thing. It is largely not trusting Pedro to get to a super effective range often enough, like spending time at kicking range with Cheeto. Sure, you're going to get some kicks off on him, but he's going to kick you back, and Cheeto is and always has been a really hard kicker. And just a really hard puncher, too. Like, he's going to do damage with his jab. He's going to be extremely hard to damage in return. If this were an earlier phase of Pedro's career, I would maybe be counting on not only some pace and pressure on the feet, but him to actually threaten with his wrestling as well. This is something people should do to Cheeto more often. Like, we saw in his Aldo fight, like, that's an opening people used to exploit a lot, and he's gotten better at sort of not allowing it to get to that point. But if you fight for a hard takedown, you're probably still going to bank some significant time on top of Cheeto Vera.
Yeah.
And Pedro used to be regarded with good reason as just an exceptionally good wrestler, given the fact that his grappling credentials are in jiu-jitsu. But he doesn't really go for it or get to the range where he could think about going for it as often as he used to. So yeah, I just don't know if, it's a 3-rounder. Maybe Cheeto just takes too much time off.
Yeah. It is increasingly hard to see that happening against, for modern Cheeto. I mean, just because if he was back in his era where his only range weapon was a low kick, but I think just once he starts jabbing with Pedro, I'm just not sure how that fight goes.
Yep.
He's got a really powerful jab. Even if he can't hurt Pedro, it's just going to be snapping his head back much more than Pedro will be doing the same to him.
Yep.
I mean, their respective fights against a very faded Frankie Edgar sort of illustrate that Pedro can just get into exchanges and have a big war with him, and then Cheeto can just dust Edgar when he got into exchanges with him.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. And a lot of Cheeto's game is particularly well suited to hurting little short guys. The front kick on Edgar, he throws good knees, good high kicks in general. He's got surprisingly sharp uppercuts as well, and a lot of his striking game is built on that weird sort of like squared up, almost like trip hammer jab that he throws straight down from his guard. It's kind of like a dropping jab. Very difficult to get past, very difficult to time, even though it tends to come from all the way back by his face. He doesn't telegraph it a lot, and yet it comes with a lot of power. So, yeah, I don't see how I could not pick Cheeto. We're already going to be long, but I do kind of want to just say a couple words here at the end about Chris Weidman. Not a technical review of the fight, really, but, Chris Weidman was really, really good.
Yeah.
He was genuinely very good. He was a surprisingly adept boxer, strong fundamentals, used his jab well, moved his feet pretty well, good power. He was super durable. Pretty basic on the defense, but really had an instinct for like winning rounds and putting pressure on people and not allowing them to build too much momentum on him. And of course, a great wrestler with a grappling game super well connected to his wrestling style. I still remember the great article that Coach Mike Reardon wrote on Bloody Elbow years and years ago about Chris Weidman having, I think, what he described as a head-mashing style in wrestling. Front headlocks, breaking posture, full Nelson, half Nelson kind of stuff, controlling people in scrambles and in rides, and stopping their attempts to get up using head control. And Weidman developed very quickly into a punishing submission grappler when he first started jiu-jitsu and MMA, because he just transitioned so smoothly into like guillotining and darsing people using what was already the basis of his wrestling game. And now he's a shell. It happens, but he's 39 years old. His leg fucking snapped in half in his last fight, which was now over 2 years ago. And I thank God that he's taken on Brad Tavares here and not somebody else. But he was just talking about how he's going to forge his path back to the title. And that is not going to happen, buddy.
No.
That is just not going to happen.
Yeah, watching him get basically shoved out of the fight by a Jacare who then was himself on the verge of, disintegrating and has now retired. Even a visibly shot Brad Tavares might well beat Chris Weidman, whose, I think, sole win in the last however many years is Omari Akhmedov. Am I correct there?
He had, between the loss to Rockhold, which really started his decline, he also had that win over Gastelum.
Yeah, but I mean, that is 5 years ago.
Yeah.
6 years ago.
Yeah, and the fight with Akhmedov was tough.
Yeah.
Was very tough. I'm not going to pick Brad Tavares over him, honestly, because Brad Tavares looks incredibly shot as well, and Brad Tavares at his best is a fighter who is far too low output for his own good, who the example of this has become his fight with Dricus. But in many, many other fights, Brad Tavares has a chronic tendency of letting an opponent that he is beating back into the fight.
I mean, the Dricus fight was one where, Brad Tavares clearly panicked and started just swinging. It's just like, this is not what you're meant to be good at, right, Brad Tavares?
You're a sharp technician. Like, this guy should be a feast. But he hurt Dricus. Like, he fucked him up early in that fight. And the type of guy Brad Tavares is as a fighter is that after that happened, he did not think, oh, I can beat this dude. He didn't have his confidence swell. What he did was breathe a sigh of relief. Whew, I've slowed him down for now. I can ease up. He has a very sparring partner, survivalist kind of mindset when it comes to fights. And as happens with a lot of fighters, sort of neuroses, that has gotten worse as he's gotten older and slower. And he is one of the prime cases of somebody who's the great sign of their decline is their increasing inability to pull the trigger, which was already a problem for him.
Yeah, I mean, well, as I said, I think the Duplessis fight was less that than it was, I think in some ways, even more concerning. Because if it was him, because Brad Tavares has never really pulled the trigger, at least that's what he spent his career doing. But being a wild brawler who gasses himself out, that's just silly. And he fought Bruno Silva and got knocked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess we are picking it. We've been talking about it enough. You know what? I'm going to take Brad Tavares.
Okay.
I just think Chris Weidman is so shot. Like,
it's true.
So incredibly shot. And I think, I think Brad Tavares can still low kick him. And that's one of the things which just kills old fighters.
That's true.
You just get it's, Frankie Edgar, Anderson Silva, point Chris Weidman. When people just go after old fighters and they're like, let's start trading leg durability, and the old person just falls over and goes,
my hip, my knee. Yeah.
Yeah, like Adesanya has like a sort of technical simmer with Anderson Silva, and then what's his face? Cannonier goes out and he's like, what if I just kick Silva in the leg as hard as I can?
And he hated it.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Brad Tavares will probably just kick Chris Weidman. I just think Chris Weidman's so shot. Brad Tavares is very shot and is obviously at his very best was not close to being the same price that Chris Weidman is.
Right, yeah.
I'll pick so shot.
I'll pick Weidman for no particular reason. That sounds pretty good. I mean, I will say I'm glad they're doing this rather than anything else.
Yeah.
If the guys want to keep fighting, I can't tell them not to. Yeah, put the two shot guys against each other. That's fine, I guess.
Yep.
I'm talking about it like it's depressing because I'm sad about the downfall of two fighters I really liked, honestly, in their primes. But it's fine. It's a good piece of matchmaking because they're both shells of their former selves, and I'll take that.
Yeah, I agree. It's fine. There's no one else that I would want to see either one of these guys fight.
Right.
Tavares has gotten thrown out of the cage by super athletes a bunch of times. I mean, he lost to one of the examples of being the glue factory fighter who is bad but athletic, Enriquez Duplessis.
Yep.
On his way to a title shot. And
Bruno Silva's just a worse version of that, like much worse.
Yep, exactly. So I don't need to see him in any more of those fights. My bloodthirst is sated. And similarly, like when Chris Weidman's like, I'm going to go up to light heavyweight and fight Dominic Reyes.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't need to see him getting killed anymore.
Nope. Yep, I'll take this, and I hope it's a leg kick TKO or a submission. Let's keep it. Those are the unwritten rules of this one, boys. It's
just like a close decision where like Chris Weidman wins on with like top control, and then Brad Tavares immediately retires afterwards. And then Chris Weidman is like, well, I guess I won that, but it was really hard, and Brad Tavares has looked like shit lately. Maybe I'm not going to be champion.
He's not going to have that thought, and you know it.
I know.
I mean, he will, but he won't. He will not be able to acknowledge that he's having that thought. It'll be a feeling in his bones that he then looks at a picture of himself holding the belt and tries to visualize it away.
You are 100% correct.
That's the guy he is. Yeah. But, I'll take it. Let's keep it two-hand touch, fellas,
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what that means, do you?
I'm assuming it's some kind of American football thing.
It is. Yeah, no tackling. It's a friendly game between friends in the park. Two-hand touch. That's a tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Very, very astute, Phil. Very astute. And that's it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Ton of good fights. I mean, just a very good pay-per-view card. And as I said before, we've got some good ones coming up. So, I'm reinvigorated. I'm enjoying this portion of the UFC schedule until they, in 2 months' time, they are going to crush our souls with some more Apex cards. But that's just a distant nightmare. I'm barely even traumatized yet, unless I stop talking and think. So let's not do that. Instead, let's wrap up the show. Find us on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson, at Boxing Bush. Check out our Patreon. Thank you for listening. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been heavy hands.